Hi guys, and welcome back to A Taste for Life. Today I'm going to be talking about calories on menus. And if you follow me on social media at all, you probably already know that this is the video that's coming. But for a little bit of context for the purposes of this video, yesterday I did upload an article. The article was from Euronews, and I believe it was posted by them on the 31st of July 2022. So you'll probably notice that this is kind of old information, but it's something that is still relevant and talked about in the recovery space. So I really wanted to touch on it today. But also you may notice that the article was written prior to the compulsory obligation that restaurants now have in the UK to include menus on calories. So it was kind of a pre-opinion piece, but also very, very informative. And if you didn't get a chance to read the article, basically what it was describing was that there was going to be an obligation for restaurants to include this information on their menus, and it kind of explored the opinions that people were having about it, being like the positives and the negatives. Basically, the initiative was introduced to lower obesity rates in the UK because there had been a significant increase in obesity rates amongst adults and also amongst children. So in an effort to kind of eradicate that or minimize it a little bit, they thought that putting calories on menus would be a good idea so that people have that information to make a more informed decision when they are eating out. On the other hand, and on the other side of the spectrum, people were arguing that this is going to really trigger eating disorder sufferers, or it could even engross them more in their eating disorder, or it could even prompt the development of an eating disorder, which, you know, is a big statement and is a bit of a stretch, but those were the concerns that were being put forward, and that's basically what the article was talking about. So with that context in mind, what I want to do today is have a constructive conversation around calories on menus. And I will say I do have a particular stance on this topic, but I want to try and explore it from both sides. Though I am aware it's going to come across really one-sided because I do have such strong opinions about it. But at the end of the day, all I want to do is put out my opinion. You obviously don't have to agree with it, and everyone's going to have their own opinion on the matter, which will be so interesting. I mean, leave comments if you have a contrary opinion. I'd love to hear about it. But nevertheless, this is just my thoughts on this topic. Now, I think a good way to start this discussion is to simply define a calorie. And most of us will have a general idea of what calories are, but just for the sake of this video, I want to give a really simple definition. So this hasn't been taken from the dictionary, or I haven't Googled it or anything, but I think for the purposes of this video, it'll suffice. So the way I want to explain what a calorie is for this video is, I would say it's a unit of measurement in determining how much energy is in consumables, so that being food or beverages. So the reason that I wanted to start with a definition of calories is because I want to begin by discussing the most obvious complication of having calories on menus, and that is that it very well could be a trigger and would be a trigger for people who have eating disorders that also incorporate calorie counting. But I wanted to give it a definition to give a more global perspective. So eating disorders run off a fear response, and this fear response alone will often skewer our reality. So I think it's really important to stay conscious of the fact that what we're sometimes thinking is very disordered and very different to what the rest of the population is thinking. So as I described before, the intentions of this initiative are really to help guide the overweight and obese population in the UK, which is growing dramatically, so that they can make informed decisions about the food choices they're making at restaurants by referencing the calories associated to each meal. But I believe that it goes much, much deeper than that and can have merit in a lot more ways than it's being presented. So whilst the focus of this initiative is geared towards obesity control, I can actually identify a variety of people that would benefit from having calories on menus at restaurants. And I just want to take a minute to describe these specific groups. So let's begin with athletes and trainers. This group of people is often known for tracking calories, and for very good reason. Now, whilst I acknowledge that some take it too far and it can lead to disordered eating, a lot of the time they're doing calorie tracking in order to enhance their performance. And this can be on a professional level or just your average person who takes their fitness, athleticism very seriously. So I want to use the example of a football player. Now, football players train constantly. They would train during the season, they'd train pre-season, and probably in the off-peak period as well, just to keep up with the level of fitness that they need to be a professional in that field. So if we consider their dietary requirements, we can understand why their energy input would need to be greater than the average person. Now, if you're a professional football player, you would probably have the guidance of a nutritionist, dietitian, probably someone specialized in athletes or sport people, and you would do it in a very guided manner. But for someone training to get to that level or whatever it may be, they may take it upon themselves to make drastic changes to their diet in order to keep up with the level of performance that is required. So, depending on their specific needs and preferences, this could obviously encompass some kind of calorie tracking. And that's where this initiative would also be beneficial to them. Now, being a sports person, they would probably already have some kind of knowledge as to the calories in the meals they're having. But particularly at restaurants, it's sometimes harder to guesstimate exactly how many calories are. And for someone who is vigorously training and wants to enhance their performance, they may have periods of time where they are pretty rigid about the calories they want to put in. So I think it's very useful for them to have this as a referencing guide. So the next group of people I want to talk about are women. Now, women's bodies go through a lot, but there are particular periods of time where calorie tracking may be more necessary than others. So the average woman wouldn't necessarily track calories, even though women are more prone to fluctuations in calorie requirements. And that's just because of hormonal reasons and all the rest of it. But when we're really vulnerable is during pregnancy. So during the third trimester in particular, your body is preparing for birth and requires more energy. This is probably an intuitive thing that happens to most women where they'll just start consuming more. But if this isn't happening to you for whatever reason, you may be required for a shorter period of time to track your calories just so you know that you're getting the energy that you need to prepare yourself adequately. Now, after birth, if you choose to breastfeed, this then continues into that. In order to breastfeed and produce milk in itself, you do require a higher level of energy intake. And for some people, again, that'll be an intuitive response. And for others, they'll struggle with that and they may need to make a more conscious effort to be putting more into their body and fueling it more efficiently. And some people may just choose to blindly increase their intake. But for other people, they may need a more structured program where they track their calories for a while until they're comfortable with the fact that they're putting enough into their body in order to keep producing milk. So again, this is where calories on menus can be really, really helpful. The next group I wanted to talk about were the vulnerable. And just for this particular video, I'm going to use the example of a person with dementia. Now, it's not uncommon for a person with dementia to neglect or forget to feed themselves. And you could probably assume that once it gets to this level, they'd need a higher level of care. Now, this may sometimes be a facility, but it could often be a loved one who takes on the carer's responsibility. So if that were to be the case, then the onus would be on that carer to ensure that their loved one is getting the nutrition that they require. So a lot of the time, the carer would probably seek professional opinions from, say, a dietitian or even the general GP who is managing that individual. However, sometimes that's just not accessible to people for different reasons, whether it be financially or physically, depending on your geographical location. And in that case, again, the responsibility goes back onto that carer. Now, assuming that the individual at least has GP care, it could probably be assumed that there may need to be a little bit of tracking going on here, just to understand when exactly the person is getting nourishment, when they're more receptive to receiving nourishment, and how much energy they're actually receiving a day. And depending on the information collected, it could be the case that calorie tracking is again required, whether it be long-term or for a short period of time, so that we can make sure this person's individual energy needs are being met day to day. So I'm sure the GP would have some great general advice about ways to track this. However, without a specialized dietitian involved, it could be a little bit complicated for the carer to keep up with exactly what this person needs. And they may decide to do their own research and try to calorie count as accurately as they can for this individual. But again, just having something as simple as calories on a menu could make a real difference. And I know in this example, someone with dementia that's severe may not necessarily even attend a restaurant, but it's even for things like getting takeaway or whatever, you're still looking at the menu and you can still have access to that information. So in a similar ballpark, another group that could benefit from calories on a menu would be people who are sick and people who are recovering from surgery. Now, we know that when our body is in distress or experiencing some kind of trauma, it requires more energy in order to keep up with the maintenance and repair that the body needs. So for both of these situations, it could be the case that calorie tracking once again is necessary, whether that's long-term or for a short period of time. So again, if we look at who this is really actually impacting, it could be anyone in the general population. Unfortunately, illness and injury occur all the time, and it's an unavoidable part of life, which means that one day we will most likely experience a period, whether it be prolonged or short term, where we have to be a little bit more intuitive and careful with our body. So again, it's probably safe to assume that a dietitian or nutritional professional of some sort would be active in a person like this care. So let's take the example of someone who has just gotten over a surgery. It's probably the case that they're associated to a hospital. They may be staying there for a few days just for observations before they can go home. Now, it's likely that a dietitian would come to see them just so that they're aware of what they need to be doing in order to heal correctly. And the case may be that they just need to incorporate one additional supplemental drink in order to enhance their body's reactive response and maybe promote immunity. But it could also very well be the case that the dietitian just gives a more generalized idea based on the individual's current diet. So it could be suggested that they add a snack or two snacks to their everyday routine in order to meet higher energy requirements. So obviously that would be a pretty broad plan from the dietitian and would probably only be based on the minimal amounts of information that person disclosed during their consultation. So if that individual went away and wanted to really focus on how they can incorporate specific foods into their meal plan in order to meet what they had discussed, it could be suggested that it lacks flexibility. So if the person says that every night they have X for a supper snack, but they feel like going out and having Y, having calories on the menu could help them just double check what an equivalency would be. And it seems very inflexible to track it so so specifically. And I'm sure that most people wouldn't go to this extreme. But for someone who is very conscious of their body, or for someone who's trying to heal really quickly because of other underlying issues, it could actually be really important for them to get as close to what they were prescribed as possible. So it would be beneficial for them to have calories on the menu. So the last group I want to talk about may be controversial, just because of recent there's been some demonizing of people who go on diets. But it's important to remember that people who are dieting aren't always doing it for disordered or harmful reasons. And there are merits in particular people going on diets for particular reasons, and I think it's just got a little bit of a bad rap. But honestly, when it's done constructively and for health purposes, it can be very necessary. So this one is pretty self-explanatory anyway, but for someone who is going on a diet, it is absolutely important for them to have access to this information. So for someone on a diet, they're usually your average person who wouldn't track calories usually, but is trying to be a little bit more careful with their choices. So being able to read the calories quickly and easily straight off the menu is a great tool for them. So there's probably many other groups that I'm neglecting to mention in this video, but a lot of people can get benefits from having calories on menus. I'm going to stop the video here though and make this a part 1 of the discussion. But in part 2, I want to try and explore the people that by having calories on menus may adversely affect. And it could be the case that I don't necessarily agree with why it'll impact them, but we'll explore more next video. I'll see you then.